And greetings. Welcome to the Evidence Reasons Academy. I'm joined by Samuel. He is an 18-year-old high school student and is about to probably enter college. He's interested in a variety of things, and I know that when I was his age, it meant a lot to me that a Christian gentleman came to my high school, and I don't know how this at all happened. He showed up after class. Someone managed to get him in, and he talked about creationism. That was very important to the direction of my whole life. And so I'm here at Samuel's service to just talk about getting through college and then careers. Things have changed in the path that I took. I wouldn't necessarily say is the best path. Maybe on some level I could share what not to do. And I've also been in contact with people that are recently getting through school and the challenges there. And so these are just things to talk about. So maybe we'll talk about for 20 minutes. I'll give some of my ideas, and then Samuel can ask me. If I happen to know anything, I'll give what little I know. I'm trusting that God will direct his steps. When we were backstage, we prayed. I said, God, if there's something that is going to be unhelpful, help him to forget. And if it's good and it's from you, help him to hold on to that. And so also I'm hoping this will be kind of as Samuel matriculates through school, he'll be a resource to share how to get through school, et cetera, for others. And it's been great having Emery relate how he got through school, and we're learning some things that are very challenging. They're just the thing that I said they're the right they're questions you need to ask. So sometimes it's not even knowing, just being fed a lot of information. It's actually even knowing what questions to ask and how to take inventory of your resources and your talents and skills, and actually interest level is really, really important. So with that, Samuel, welcome. First time on this show.
Thank you.
All right. So the question comes up, how to be a creationist and a professional. I think there are opportunities for anyone who can just do science, period. But now that's this become a really broad topic, because what science means for one person, what they may imagine a science career is, could be very different for someone else. And it may not be anything that, you know, it could be the luck of the draw. Okay, so to be a doctoral level scientist, it's like, oh my goodness, did you end up, some guy could be going and getting the right advisor, and he happens to be in a hot field, and he sails through. But I've seen horror stories where someone was a PhD student for 11 years, and then the technology is gone. Her name was Dr. Anita. I don't even remember her last name, doesn't matter. But she was in what they call VLSI technology in the computer chip industry. The computer chip industry it's still booming, but she just happened to be in the wrong specialty. And she spent 11 years doing VLSI technology. It died, and it was gone.
Oh my goodness.
All right. So I'm sorry to tell you about the pitfalls of, it's just like if you look at the success of a football player who has a great career, it's like, hey, that's what I want to do. And it's like, all right, one, there's competition, and then sometimes you end up, let's say even you're very talented, you end up on a terrible team with a terrible coach. So this is trying to kind of mold expectations, because it could drive you crazy, and it could have a very adverse effect on your life if you're not ready for some adversity. It's great it's always great if you get a surprise, but I'll just say this is, college recruiters, etc., employers will always try to paint a very rosy picture, and then you end up there and it is not what you expected. So one of the things to do is just try to get some inside information. See if you can meet students who are at the school and find out, help them, find out from them who are the good and bad professors. Now, if you think about it, it's like, that's a lot of work. But think about what it's like, and you haven't talked to anyone, and you commit to something, and then you're in a 11-year PhD program, or even a 4-year college. Okay. So it may pay off to spend the time trying to meet people, trying to meet former students and talk to them. Even if you have just a 1-hour interaction, they say, this was great, or you find out, oh, this is awful. Okay. Something to keep track of. There are some students that are just so talented, and they're just so determined. You could throw them in a terrible environment, they're just going to prosper. So that's just something to know also. But I'll tell you, there was one horror story at one school that I was a part of. The professor is basically using his students as slave labor, even though they're college undergrads, like sophomores and juniors. And he was so harsh on them, and he was making them write software for him, and he's going to try to sell it. The guy was just evil.
Yeah, that's terrible.
So I just need to, I need to try to manage expectations. There are, we hope that some academic institutions are on the up and up, and also, even just because a university declares itself to be a Christian university, it could still be a racket there. And it's when Jesus said, in this world you have trouble, in your churches you have trouble, in et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I wish I had known that when I was growing up, because I was very naive about how bad the world was. I mean, I grew up at a time that was it was a very optimistic era. At least now things are kind of, scary, and it's so obviously scary.
Yeah.
But when I was growing up, World War II was done, and it looked like, man landed on the moon. It looked like it would be eternal progress.
Yeah.
So there was just a different mindset then, and I was very naive about how people were, and I trusted institutions, and now I'm just very cynical. Um, and it's hard to be it's hard to be kind of keep your integrity and try to be a good guy, and you see all the evil going around, and it can be very disheartening. And I've talked to people that were in seminary, and I hear these people say, "Oh, I want to go to seminary so I could be closer to the Lord," and I just roll my eyes. I said,
Yeah.
if you only knew how many people lost their faith in seminary, you wouldn't have that attitude. Because seminary has, what it is the money, when it starts to create a financial incentive.
People take advantage of it.
Yeah, it can slowly corrupt. Good people can be corrupted, because there's a passage in Timothy. Some people have abandoned, the love of money. Some people have abandoned the faith. So they may have started out good. They got a taste of the money and the power, and they slowly over years got corrupted. So when you hear horror stories about, like, say, evangelists and defenders of the faith, like Ravi Zacharias. I mean, I used to love his sermons, and he ended up getting corrupted. So that's the first thing I'd say. Just try to have a life outside of your profession to kind of sustain you. I know that's kind of hard to do. The profession consumes so much. And if you're a good student, it will pave opportunities for you. So the path of someone wanting to be a scientist, I'll give you just one example. James Carter, he's been on my channel. He's a professor of organic and biochemistry, but you have to know, you end up learning so much biology in the process. So his path in school was 27 years.
Wow. My goodness.
So yeah, 4 years as an undergrad. Okay, so let's see. Let me see how this works out. So 27 minus 12. So for grade school, 27 minus 12 is 15 years. So he had 4 years as an undergrad, and then 11 years as a graduate student.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, I'm just trying to, I would hope you could sail through a program, but this is where, and I mean, to really be a great creationist scientist, which I'm not, I don't consider myself there. It may be a PhD program, particularly in biology. And it's if God has put it on your heart for that excellence, then this is the commitment, and God will have to make the path enjoyable, that you'll just love it so much you'll be looking forward to it. Because I don't know how anyone else could survive that environment unless they really loved it and needed it. And so sometimes when you can get a little sample of what life is, it'll help direct your decision making, and say, this is too much, or I can't get enough of this.
Yeah.
And it could also be the field. Like, for example, for me, people know me as a biologist. I'm actually an engineer and student of physics, but I needed a job. And if I did genetics, I think I'd go crazy. But I ended up doing protein biology, and it was a total, okay. So when you just say biology, it's like, well, it depends on what field.
Yeah.
I just love protein biology. I did not like genetics, and it's kind of bad. I mean, my professional publications have been in genetics, but it's like, that's not the field I really like.
Yeah.
So those are the questions to ask. And sometimes you really don't know until you've been through the basics. And sometimes it might be that you start out and the initial classes and the professors are just terrible, and it's a revolting experience, but you're in the right field, because if you persist, it ends up being interesting. So for me, I really didn't want to go into computer science, but it got me enough of the skill set I needed. Then I went into the defense industry and I loved it. I couldn't get enough. I couldn't get enough. So it's like, yeah, I was sitting there in math class and hating it. But then looking in retrospect, that was something I really liked. So, um, you know, uh, I would say just, I tell you what, why don't you, um, maybe we'll have another show and you'll tell me what kind of things you've done, activities you've done to help you decide. Um,
Yeah.
and I got to tell you, it could be like you're 3 years into a program, and then you realize, oh, this is, I'm going to have to change kind of what I'm going to do, or what I'm going to specialize in. But if God, I will tell you that people that have, where it's been impressive is where they started with kind of a plan and they're able to stick to it and they really loved it. And I'd say that's a thing of God, where God
Yeah.
just put it in your heart and somehow that's for you, and he'll just get you through there. But it still doesn't hurt to do due diligence. It does say in the book of Proverbs, in many counselors there's victory. So the way God speaks to us is through his people. So each of them will have a piece of the puzzle, which also means a lot of them will give you stuff that you shouldn't follow, but they'll have one valuable piece you need to listen to. And through the process of talking to all these people, you'll start to piece it together. So, if you find if you find counselors to tell you, um, and I look at it this way too. You're going to be now paving out a journey for the next generation.
Yeah.
So the stuff you find, when you find it, you'll have to share it with other people, what your experiences were. So, I decided when we were going to have this conversation, I would just suggest what things to ask and to kind of help mold expectations. Now, some people have been able to do like 4 years of undergrad, 3 years of maybe a year and a half of master's, and then 4 years of PhD. So what would that be? Six plus,
Nine
that'd
and a
be a
half.
10 year. It's still a 10-year program, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a fast track.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and so I'm just throwing that out there. The other thing is when you get very, very specialized like that, it's kind of funny. Sometimes when you're too specialized, it's harder to get a job. It can be. So it's good if you can get a situation where they'll pay you, to get through your PhD.
Okay.
Um, and I'm kind of in that same boat. I'm looking at a PhD. I might have to self-finance it, and that's going to be costly. But these are things both of us have to figure out. I mean, I wish I had a PhD. So
Mm-hmm.
what had helped me is I had another career, because I'll tell you, okay. I'm going to give you some of the ugly side of the creationist movement. Right, just kind of due diligence here. If you end up with a creationist organization, remember that some of them are, after all, they're advocacy groups. And let's say you get up into a creationist organization and they start making you write things that you don't agree with.
Oh.
Okay,
Oh, I know some stories about that.
okay. There's a reason I'm telling you that. So it is just because you may join, and I've been a part of a Christian organization, and it was sobering what a bad experience it was. All right. So just because, I mean, I had a friend, I had a brother-in-law. He said, "Okay, I've been in the corporate world, commercial world, academia, and in the church world." He said the worst relationships, the most backstabbing, most political. He was also involved in politics, but he said the worst place was church. Like, oh boy.
Yeah.
All right. So, just forewarning you that you can, you know, being a creationist in a creationist organization, it may not be the dream job that you may think. But um, but what I want to share is you can have a tremendous impact on people's lives and the advancement of knowledge. So who would I hold up as a great role model? It'd be Rob Stadler, obviously John Sanford, but um, I mean John is like so stratospheric. It's like I don't know many people that drive, so I'm going to go a little bit less. Okay, with Rob Stadler, but even then you're like that's still pretty high to attain. So have you heard of Rob Stadler?
I have, yeah. He's the one who wrote it was a book on it was like the stairway to
Your life. Okay, so his path, he got a PhD from MIT and Harvard. Is a dual program,
oh my goodness.
biomedical engineering. He got patents. Millions of people have a device he invented,
Wow.
implanted in their body. They're alive today because of him. And he can write with authority because of his position.
What device is that?
It's a heart implant of some sort.
Hmm.
I wish I knew. So I actually don't know. He also wrote the book about it's about high quality science versus low quality science, and
I think I've heard of that. Yeah.
that's also good. I haven't read that, but his description it's a very good book. He's comparing evolutionism to real science. So you see that his 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 accomplishment in that field gave him a lot of doors open to him,
Yeah.
and if he and it's amazing that he hasn't joined a creationist organization. So I'll tell you what some of these creationist organizations are. There are evangelistic organizations, and then there are really ones that are more oriented toward research. So
Is Rod Stadler a young Earth creationist?
quietly, yes.
Okay.
He doesn't emphasize it. So
Yeah, that's probably why I was under the impression that he was like old Earth or something.
yeah, he doesn't talk about it much. He thinks that's the natural reading of the Bible, but his focus is on intelligent design. And this is another thing. Okay, so let's say you're a chemist, and that's also a wonderful profession, because I'll give you a data point, and this is already 15 years old. But there was a gentleman who was I'm not going to say his name. he was a professor of chemistry. He went to a biological conference on biology. There was no one there that had a biology degree. They're all chemists, biochemists, computer scientists, physicists, mathematicians. And you're like, why is that? Well, depending on the field of biology, like I've looked at some of these, because I do read peer-reviewed papers just and then I'll find out where the lab is and how they found out all this. They don't have biology degrees. They have biochemistry degrees.
Huh.
They have biochemistry degrees. And then you'll have guys then like in computational, they had computer science degrees. And
you mean computational biology that they had?
They ended up computational biology, but their background, their actual undergrad degree was not in biology.
Huh.
So that's not to say, I'm not telling you not to major in biology.
Yeah.
But I'm just, the thing is if you have a special, chemistry why don't you tell me what area of biology interests you?
I like the idea. I'm basically debating between like a more biology with like an emphasis in zoology or molecular biology. Those are the two I'm debating.
Okay. So this is where you'll have to kind of test the waters and see what fits.
Yeah, that's what I'm planning on doing.
Okay, that's just kind of how And hopefully you can, hopefully when you take a little sample, it'll direct you how, hopefully when you take kind of your first sample of the field you think, uh, the way you like it will be the way you'll like it forever, uh, so to speak. And that'll help. Now, let me just share something about me. I did take a personality inventory, and being a scientist was not what I was cut out to be. I had maybe the intellectual ability, but I didn't have the heart. I think I wanted to just write comic books. Okay. All right. So, um, okay. So I'm just being straight. I wanted to be a musician, and, I didn't have the personality. And, maybe that was the cross to bear for my life. God said, hey, I know you don't like this, but I'm giving you the talent. You may not have the heart, but it's going to be a cross for you to bear. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll bear it. I'll bear it. I may resent it, but I'll bear it. And it ended up being probably a good, what if I spent my life just writing fiction and comic books, without
You could
necessarily
be
bringing
writing
it.
evolutionary fiction.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying it's bad. I mean, I praise God for the artists who write fiction books and are
Yeah,
very
yeah.
imaginative. But
No,
for
yeah,
me,
that's super neat.
spiritually, it wouldn't have helped. See, studying creation, studying science has helped me spiritually. I think you may have heard me relate the story where he had lost his faith when he was a senior. By the time he was a senior or so in high
Oh,
school,
yeah, I do remember this.
yeah, he went off to study biology under atheists and evolutionists. You think he'd be a lost soul forever, but he just kept studying. When he took his fourth year, he's studying cellular physiology. He said, "There's just no way. Everything my
Yeah, it's
professor says this
inescapable.
evolved." Yeah, it was undeniable. He rededicated his life to Jesus. 6 months later,
Wow,
got
praise
married,
God.
went off to seminary, or went off to seminary, got married. Now he's a defender of the faith. His name's Matt Bilyeu. Um, he was on Rebecca Davis's channel. So, um, where I was headed with that, it was because I had the science, I was able to stay in the faith. It it
Mhm.
it was the key to me remaining in the faith, because I could do the math, and I had the reasoning skills to see that evolutionary theory. Well, first off, abiogenesis is broken. Evolutionary theory is not far behind. And when I was growing up, and this is a long time ago, like in the mid 1970s, when I was in junior high,
Mhm.
um, they're doing the Yuri Miller experiment. They're advertising it, and so
Yeah, that and
it's getting solved. And then before you knew it, they said they started to appeal to extraterrestrials. And present day, they're talking about multiple universes to solve the
yeah,
problem.
that's when you know something's wrong.
Yeah. So the trend has not gotten, the goalpost keeps getting farther. The more, you know, uh, they keep saying, well, science keeps figuring it out. It's like, well, science has solved a lot of things in other fields, but that trend isn't happening for origin of life. And
Yeah.
then in evolutionism, um, they keep pretending they're successful, but the reason they're able to get away with it, origin of life researchers at least have real experiments in the lab.
Yeah,
Like,
that's new.
evolutionists don't have any experiments. They can make up whatever they want, and it's disgusting.
Yeah, I've noticed that
So
in AP Bio. There's never an experiment attached to anything. It's always
yes,
basically just some story in that, you know.
right. So we can talk about the science in a little bit. So just we can revisit this conversation. You can get back to me what you have seen, and I will just caution that just because something is dreary and distasteful for a season, you might look back and say, I'm really glad I have this skill set, because it'll distinguish you. So for some people, um, organic chemistry was just too brutal and they didn't want to pursue that. That broke a lot of people, organic chemistry.
Yeah.
um, so you'll find out. Now, you said molecular biology. just as a FYI, molecular biology is kind of a misnomer because it deals really with the central dogma of molecular biology, which is
Some
DNA.
DNA goes to some RNA, which goes to some protein.
Exactly. You got that. All right. Thank you for watching. Did you get that from me and Cindy?
I got the some part from you guys.
Yeah. Okay. Because uh, no one, I don't think any professor can responsibly just give you the statement because there's so many statements of the central dogma and it's been changing.
Yeah.
But that's essentially it. But there's way more to biology than, you know,
Oh yeah,
because
way
they just,
more.
if some DNA goes to RNA, what happens to the rest of the DNA that doesn't? There's a whole bunch of
Yeah.
chemistry there. And how about some of the RNA? What happens to the rest of the RNA that doesn't code for proteins? And so right there you have already, but then there's so much to life. There's the chemistry of proteins. What do they do?
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, that's not covered in, a molecular biology class. I mean, you don't learn about collagen and molecular biology, what it does.
Mhm.
And they're like 20,000 proteins. So it's just like, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That reminds me of a video I sent you that we watched in our classroom. It's called what is it? The most complex language or something like that. Something like that. But we watched that video and it was all about proteins and it was just crazy how
yeah.
complex. It's just nuts. It's crazy.
Okay. Let me give you an anecdote. I was studying biochemistry. Doctors, remember I'm an engineer at heart,
Mhm.
and I had to learn biology for my job with Dr. Sanford. And I was in a, I took biochemistry. It was a big decision for me whether I should take biochemistry. And I said, okay, I'd really like to do all this stuff, but am I going to humble myself and just take a elementary course? And I said, I have to, so I can understand the language. So I was in this first semester of biochemistry, and the professor was just drawing up this diagram of a biochemical pathway. This reaction creates this product and this product mixed together, and then you have another reaction. And he said, okay, and you see how this all connects and it does this and that and it self-regulates. He said, boy, the way this is designed is just so elegant. And then he stopped himself. He said, oh, I'm not supposed to say that. The whole class laughed. The whole
Yeah.
class laughed as if they know, okay, this is not politically correct to say that, but it's so obvious.
Yeah, it's funny. And my teacher will sometimes say stuff like she'll use like teleological language. She'll say this is designed to do this, and I'll be sitting there and I'll be like, you were just teaching us a minute ago that it's just evolved from goo, like come on.
Exactly. And so this is why I'm hopeful, because um, it's hard to run away from complexity. Now, this is different, and I try to tell creationists the evolution of complexity is a different question than that of common descent. I mean,
Yeah.
speaking, because the impression I've told it to young Earth creationists. I said, there's a segment of you that just totally can believe God created all the species lines. And I said, that wasn't so easy for me, because when I went off to study bioinformatics, um, you'll see how similar we are to chimpanzees. And they
Yeah,
have, there are,
all the rest of life in general as
oh,
well.
yeah, you'll see it. I mean, when you start to learn about how they do heredity tests and paternity tests, etc.
Mhm.
If you applied that, it's like, well, it seems a reasonable inference. But and when we're backstage, I'll show you my work on that. I'm not releasing.
I would absolutely love to see that. I was going to ask you about that.
Okay, okay. I have a particular publication I'm not discussing. A
But
work
yeah,
that I've
yeah,
been working.
I understand that. That's
Okay, but I can talk about what other people have done. All right, so it doesn't hinge on me.
okay.
And this actually is kind of a nice segue into science. We can talk about careers and stuff later, but the one way to look at it is, what if God didn't make what we call model organisms like chimpanzees and mice and cats and dogs. They're very, very similar because they had the mammalian architecture. How would we learn about human biology? Have you done any dissections in AP biology yet?
No, we have not.
Okay, probably some point you'll be doing dissections. I tell you what, and you probably heard me tell this story. I was taking a cellular neuroscience course, and each of the students had to do a presentation. So what happened? The professor said, "Okay, I have some postdoctoral students working for me. I'll assign one of these postdoctoral students. That means they have a PhD, but they're studying even more. I'll assign one of them to each of you, and he'll help you understand the paper." And so let me see if I could find this.
While you're looking that up, I've always wondered, because I've always been convinced ever since, studying science, that the evolution of complexity is completely unreasonable. If anything, fantasy, religious even. But with the common descent issue, that's mainly where I do a lot of reading and stuff like that. Because I guess I've always, from the things that I've seen, and I could be wrong, but I've always wondered why animals were not more different than they are. Because if theoretically, and I could be wrong, if animals defined as anything, as a prokaryote, eukaryote, if they've been evolving for, billions of years now, why aren't they more different? You would think that they would come to like designs that were different or more specialized over time, but with animals we see today are so similar. So take, for example, like hands. So I have a hand. A chimpanzee has a very similar structure to a hand on its body. Why have we both, from an engineering perspective, that design is close to, if not optimal, the best thing that could possibly be? I'm saying, why does it happen to be that we both have the, if not perfect, optimized design? You kind of get what I'm saying?
Your instincts are in the right direction, and if I may, this is going to be an ongoing conversation, but I have some stuff to share with you that might blow your mind. It won't be specifically, my work is related to some of this, but I can share someone else's work because it's already being done. And I will share this with you. There are some creationists that are involved in these secular papers. Okay, that's the best thing.
But I don't. I guess I'm trying to
I'm not
say.
going to tell you. I'm not going to say their names publicly.
Yeah.
But they're. This is what is great. They are so talented. They're so skilled. They value what they're doing in advancing science, in advancing, helping the human condition, because this is medical research.
Yeah.
I think I have a feeling like some of them actually, they're known creationists, but no one's going to give them flack because they're that talented.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
This is what I know. Some creationists who've gotten through school, they're modestly quiet about it. I mean, if they're asked personally, they'll say, well, they'll be honest. But, if you think about it, let's say you're a professor and you're a researcher, and I've heard these creationist students say, I had some problem because they're using my stuff to justify evolutionary theory. And I wrestle with that too, because one of the papers I published, it had some evolutionism in it. And I was kind of upset about that, but it's like, hey, they're like a bazillion co-authors. I was just like, because a lot of papers now it's it's very hard to have a single author because you have laboratories competing with each other and everyone has their specialties. I mean, I've seen some of these papers, like particularly like there was one in biology that had 220 co-authors.
Oh my gosh. Yikes.
Why that many? There were so many laboratories involved in finding in researching the results. They had to
Yeah.
carry out a bazillion experiments to come up with that paper. And this is like a $500 million uh,
Wow.
project. It was the ENCODE project, and the government said you better publish on this. You spent public funds on this. You better publish what you were up to. And so they all got together and published it. It was 220 co-authors or something like that, some outrageous number.
Yeah.
So that was a rabbit trail, and I'll tell you what the work is. But first, this is the the document I wanted to share. Just something to think about. The tetrameric structure of the glutamate receptor channel. So on a cell, on a nerve cell, there are all these ways that it can interact with the environment. And on the surface, it's able to receive ions. And I think this is, yeah. Well, anyway, the experiment involved this HEK cell line. And I was just going to do a student presentation on this. I was going to show that I could read a peer-reviewed paper and then describe it to the class. And the professor liked my description. He said, well done. But okay, so it said the HEK cell line. And a human embryonic kidney 293 cells are often referred to as HEK 293.
Oh no.
Or less precisely as HEK cells, and are specific immortalized cell line derived from spontaneously miscarried or aborted fetus or human embryonic kidney. Cells grown in tissue culture can be taken from a female, grown in tissue culture taken from a female fetus in 1973. Some report this as a fetus is taken from an aborted fetus. So when that happened to me, I first I nearly wept.
Yeah.
But then I thought, Lord, isn't it good that we have creatures that are similar enough to us?
Yeah, to do experiments on.
So I'll tell you, this is where it was a stumbling block for me. I said, God, why did you make chimpanzees so similar to us? You're making my life as a creationist hard. But then when this happened, I'm just like, God, thank you. Thank you for giving us creatures similar enough to us. If there's any question of the design, that began to give hints why God made creatures similar to us. So if you look at the Old Testament, where they're sacrificing animals on the altar to atone for sins, and that's a picture of Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God.
Yes.
And the Lamb of God, it says, by his stripes we were healed. So in the medical profession, we do a lot of research on animals because they're similar to us, and by their stripes we are healed. There's the Christian theme there still.
Yeah.
And when I looked at it that way, then I didn't resent the fact that we were so similar, because the evolutionists will keep throwing it in our face. And why did God do this? And I'll say, I'll tell you what, you're going to be grateful he did.
Yeah, I think
be grateful every day that he did.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
From my experience, I guess the only real thing I feel like in my experience evolutionists have is the similarity. At this point, that's really the only. I don't want to call it convincing, because it's not that I would believe it. It's just it's better than their abiogenesis, evolution of complexity arguments. And yeah, that is an interest. I didn't really think about how that's a theme, think of it in a theme sense that is so applicable to,
Okay,
modern
so,
or the Bible.
yes, better. It's going to get better. So, you mentioned molecular biology. We would one thing that helped. Have you studied eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells in your biology class yet?
Um, kind of briefly, but I know I guess I know main differences generally.
Okay. Eukaryotic cells are insanely complex relative to a prokaryotic cell. So bacteria are prokaryotes, humans are eukaryotes, and
Yes.
our cells are some of the most complex. I would guess human cells are some of the most complex in the universe. I mean, the gap is, if you want to debate evolution and universal common ancestry, debate the prokaryote to eukaryote transition. It's just
Yeah.
insane. I mean, no one challenges me on that. I have
Yeah, no one ever.
posted this. They will never lampoon my stuff on this.
Yeah. I mean, they never talk about that, and then they just go on to say, "Oh, look at this. Look at the fossil record. Look at this little animal that looks transitional." It's like, dude, where are the experiments? Where are the actual real? Where's the science?
Right. So the eukaryote, prokaryote. Okay, I'll tell you a story. The lead author, co-author of Stairway to Life with Rob Stadler's Changed Tan, raised in a communist country, communist China,
Yeah,
went to the United States. I'm sorry.
I think I remember this.
Yes. Now I don't know whether she became a creationist first or a Christian first, but in any case, a Nobel Prize winner, George Smith, she was at the time a physical organic chemist, and she's doing postdoctoral research on frogs. George Smith, Nobel Prize winner, said, "Change, I think you should teach molecular biology." So she started to learn molecular biology. Again, she had the biochemistry, she had the chemistry background. So it was, and this is what's nice. This is what I was saying. If you know the chemistry, it's easier to get into biology because you really modern biology is at the molecular level, at the biochemistry. That's why molecular biology is kind of a misnomer, because there's a lot more to
Yeah,
molecules
yeah.
than the central dogma. But anyway, she was studying that, and she studied the way that eukaryotes process the DNA versus prokaryotes, or prokaryotes versus eukaryotes. She said there's no way one could evolve from another. And
Yeah.
also hypothetically, it doesn't make sense to have a common ancestor, because the transitions would be lethal.
That reminds me, this is kind of a tangent. We don't have to go into this, but there was this thing on Evolution News recently by Casey Luskin talking about vertebrate embryos. And there was like this new, I forgot what it was. You could probably look at it, but it was on basically a guy saying that as of right now, there's no way any of the embryos could have had a common ancestor.
Yeah,
You should look at it. It's
I
new.
bet. I mean,
It's
and that
crazy.
is so complex. It's so much easier to defend the prokaryote eukaryote transition, but there are any other number of transitions that are just going to be
Yeah,
monstrously difficult.
yeah,
So, but to complete the story on Change Tan,
yeah.
she realized that, because I asked her how that conversation came about. I said, "What motivated you to write Stairway to Life?" She said, "Well, it all began when she was studying the prokaryote eukaryote transition
Hmm.
in molecular biology." She said, "There's no way this evolved. It had to be a miracle." And
Wow.
uh, that really struck me. And I said, "That's what I'll argue when I get in front of evolutionists." And they don't want to contest me on that.
Hmm.
Honestly, they'd rather talk about the fossil record and say, "Oh, look at that." But I'll say, "Look, that doesn't explain this." And it led to other things like the protein orchard that you've seen me argue.
Yeah.
But the point I was trying to make here is, if you look, okay, these are a variety of organisms.
Hmm.
You know how we actually we wrote the genetic code? We didn't take cells from a human, we took it from bacteria. Marshall Nierenberg won the Nobel Prize on figuring out the genetic code. So the genetic code is like, how does the DNA translate, eventually get, translated into proteins? So
Mm-hmm.
for the viewer's benefit, let me just take this down and I'm going to put up another screen. But the 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 complexity of eukaryotic cell is so hard they would have had a hard time figuring out the genetic code if they didn't have a simpler organism like bacteria.
Yeah.
Let me see DNA. So let me, for the reader's benefit, let me show you the outcome. And the result can fit on a page, but this is Nobel Prize winning work. So let me see if I could, I want to find a pretty diagram to show this. To figure this out won the Nobel Prize. So this is it, guys. Nobel Prize winning work right there. That's it. You're like, is that all? It's like that. Well, that's a lot right there. This is
Yeah.
Nobel Prize winning work to figure out. So you have the DNA, which is spelled with ACTG,
Mm-hmm.
and then you had the protein, the amino acids. This won the Nobel Prize to figure out that relationship right there. That's Nobel Prize winning work right there.
Wow.
And my point is, the reason it was feasible is we had simple organisms like bacteria. And
Yeah.
so God made the creatures similar enough to us so they could be useful in helping us understand ourselves, but they're different enough that we could say the complexity could not have evolved
Wow.
naturally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I will tell you one thing: if the Earth is young, I even asked, "Do you know about Dapper Dino? Does the name ring a bell?"
Yeah. I've seen a lot of the
Okay.
online.
I asked him point blank. I said, "Okay, if the Earth is young, there's no common descent. Is that correct?" He said, "Yes." He said, "But that's
Yeah.
a stretch, Sal. You're going to have to prove that." But I said, "That's what I wanted to hear." So I
Mm-hmm.
tell creationists, why do you keep going to genetics to argue common descent? All you have to do, and it's easier said than done,
Yeah. Just show
but
that the
if you
Earth is.
believe the Earth is young and you have good evidence of it, it's a done deal.
Yeah.
Why argue the genetics? The only thing that you have then is to ask, come up with an answer why God would make such similar designs.
Yeah.
And I already pointed to two reasons. One of them was we don't have to use humans as model organisms, because the alternative, when I said if you had to dissect, the way we learn about human organs is to study, like, say, the fetal pig.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, aren't you grateful that we don't have to do this to each other?
Yeah. That would be awful. That would be
It
terrible.
would be, exactly. So the designer has given us, just like, the account of Abraham. He was going to take Isaac to be sacrificed, and he said God will provide, and God provided the goat or the sheep,
Yeah.
and he didn't have to sacrifice his son. You see, it's kind of the same thing playing out in
Yeah. It is.
biology.
It is. Yeah. That's
So,
a parallel.
and I'm the only creationist, I think I'm the first creationist to say this is the best answer. You're going to have a better answer than saying, oh, we're not that similar to chimps. I said, no, that's not going to work. You're going
Yeah.
to, people are, yeah, go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. I would definitely disagree that when people say that we're not similar to these organisms or other animals. I think that misses. I think they run away from it because they think that by saying that we are similar, that the evolutionists win somehow. And
Exactly.
therefore, they don't actually. I guess for me, it comes a lot to intuition. Like I don't know, in my intuition can be flawed, but I guess just growing up, whenever I saw a chimpanzee or something, I never attributed it to um, being related. I
Well,
always just saw it as the design of the creature was made to function optimally in a certain environment or in a certain way.
right. So everyone has their own. I will tell you, for me personally, it was a big stumbling block. Big.
Yeah.
And I'm not the only one. Michael Denton, who wrote the book that started the modern intelligent design movement.
Yeah.
Um, Michael Behe read Michael Denton's book, and that's how he got into intelligent design.
Hmm.
Denton was an old Earth creationist in high school. He went off to medical school. He's brilliant, obviously.
Hmm.
And in the process, when he was dissecting, part of his medical training, he was
Yeah, I've
dissecting.
heard about this. Yeah.
Yeah, he lost his faith almost instantly. He said, "We're so similar. Evolution's true." He became an atheist.
See right there, that just gets me so frustrated because, like, dude, go deeper into the science.
Well, you
Don't.
know what happened to him, though? He did. He wanted to write a book
Yeah.
uh, on this whole topic, and as he investigated, he said evolution's a theory in crisis.
Yeah.
And so he became an agnostic. He went from Christian to atheist to agnostic. I do hope he finds the Lord.
Yeah.
But he kind of didn't go full circle back to Christianity, but he came
Yeah.
halfway there. He realized evolution is a theory in crisis, because despite that similarity, even though he insists on common descent, he said you don't have a legitimate scientific theory.
Yeah.
And it was the complexity issue. And Michael Behe nominally accepts common descent. He said, I could take it or leave it. That's not my thing. He said, is it design? It's really, for him, it's design versus randomness. He said, whatever it is what it is, but it cannot be Darwinian evolution.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say it was a big stumbling block for me. And
Yeah.
I'm just trying to share that with you, because you may, just because it's easy for you and intuitive, it may not be easy for another.
No, and with me, the reason why I've researched this so much is because it did, and it did more trouble me. So I'm not saying that it was something that it is probably the one thing that would keep me up at night, for lack of a better word. But I guess from hearing what you have to say, is that I think that's very, very convincing, and I would love to hear what your new research is on that.
Okay.
I've also
So,
looked at the, like the engineering aspect of looking at it from an engineering perspective.
okay. All right. Now you're going to be wowed. So the first line of defense is, and you've heard this argument before, and you've probably seen it. I'll just go through it. So we might superficially, according to evolutionary theory, okay, the majority view, all life evolved from a single universal common ancestor.
Yeah.
Or they may have said it had been a pool, but at least there was one common ancestor at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whatever. And then the joke is that means the squirrel is related to a strawberry.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's just cute.
Yeah, that is kind of a cute little gift.
All right. But you can't extrapolate that to the part level. That would be
Yeah.
wrong.
And I've been thinking about that recently. I've been thinking about basically the aspect of having the parts themselves are unevolvable,
Exactly.
but that the overall structure, you can have theoretical transitions or intermediates, but the parts themselves, like the parts on a car, the parts on a machine, some specific machine, are unevolvable.
Right. So like the car, the basic architecture can diversify, but
Yeah.
there's no, yeah. This is why I tell you, I spent weeks trying to think how to convey this.
It's
And it was the
it's
parts of,
pretty coherent. It's very simple to understand, in my opinion.
yes. And do you know about Dr. Dan? Dr. Dan
Yeah,
Stern Cardinal?
I know a little bit about him. Yeah.
Okay. So he's an evolutionary biologist, but let me share this just so you could hear it. I played it before, but let me see, entire screen. I'll go ahead and mute your mic. It's just kind of funny how this is going to work so that you can actually hear it.
Okay.
Because otherwise, we'll get feedback. give you a chance. Yeah.
No, but you definitely, it seems like you represented my views very accurately, which is that there is definitely not one single common ancestor protein that every protein that we see is descended from. You have multiple independent things appearing at different times.
And that's interesting. Okay. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
All right. And then I got Aaron Ra. There's no effing common ancestor for all proteins. I'm like, well, thank you very much.
Yeah. How can they say that without realizing what they're saying? And that's,
I know. It's like, dude, you just gave away the store.
Yeah.
I mean, I've talked to evolutionary biologists. They say, oh, it's no problem for evolution. I'm just like, okay, so let me just show you that, you've heard me do
that. That fits perfectly with your thesis here that it's the parts that are unevolvable.
Right. So let me show you this diagram. The amino acids can be represented by alphabetic characters. And oh man, there. Okay. So on the left is the collagen protein. On the right is the zinc finger. Now I've taken the liberty to color code, and you can see that the architectures are really different. You're not going to have an intermediate between these.
Yeah.
So this is visually showing exactly what I got R and Rada to concede. There's no effing common ancestor. There's no way.
Yeah.
It won't make sense.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So you can attack common ancestry at least at the protein parts level.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you assume at the organismal level, you need miracles. And I'm right now working on a publication that say how difficult is it to evolve either of these? It's brutally difficult. So this is kind of like at the higher level. This is when you start to get like in your senior year of biology. Like after you've like even your junior level biochemistry course. So usually what happens is you'll study general chemistry in college. And then after that, you take organic chemistry. After that, you take biochemistry. So there's like 2 semesters of general chemistry, 1 or 2 semesters of organic. So that's sophomore year. Junior year, you have 2 semesters of biochemistry.
Okay.
And at the end of biochemistry, then, depending on what textbook and whether the professor wants to go there, you'll start to get into things called post-translational modifications. And that's when you'll start to really see it. By senior year, you'll have the tool set to really be able to argue this is too difficult to evolve. Mm-hmm. And, the reason when you get to that level, you could have a pretty good debate with any professor on the planet. They'll just say, I don't know. It's like, okay, so you don't know. So then you don't know it evolved. You accept it by faith. Okay. I know that's kind of mean, but
it's truthful nonetheless.
It's very truthful. It's very truthful. I mean, there's no reason to be polemic to your professors. I studied evolutionary biologist. I had good relationship with the professors. But I'm just saying this is the pathway when you get to this point. So now the stuff that I wanted to share, let me now, that's one of my co-authors there. All right. So let me see what we can do. All right. So what I have said, and this is not going in my research, but this is thankfully done by someone else. Current slide. So is the pencil really bent or does it just look like it?
It just looks like it.
Exactly. So what I've tried to tell people is, okay, they say, well, God's being deceptive because he makes it look evolved when it's not. And I'm like, okay, is God being deceptive because you look at this pencil and it looks bent? And, it's like, that doesn't, it either is bent or it's not. Yeah. You don't make the argument, oh, it has to be bent because God wouldn't make it look bent. That's a terrible argument.
Yeah, it's just a neutral object. It doesn't have any bad intent behind it, I guess.
Right. It's either bent or it's not. You don't bring theology into it and say, well, it has to be bent because God wouldn't be deceptive.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a lame argument. So there is this nested hierarchy in biology, but I'll explain that in a little bit. Okay. We have to find out, is it because of common descent or common design? And it has to, if the earth is young, and we have some evidence of that, even in the secular terms, like the geomagnetic field, then even Dapper Dino will say there's just not enough time for everything to evolve from bacteria to all the life we have.
Yeah.
Even in a million years, that would be too, even in 50 million years, that'd be a lot to ask.
Yeah.
And then similarly, the Earth, we used to have this geocentric model. Have you studied that in school? Where they
probably when I was, in grade school, but or like younger.
Right. So the sun rises every day. It looks like, the sun orbits the Earth.
We call it this, the sunrise or sunset all the time. I mean,
right. And so is God being deceptive by making it look like the Earth is, the sun is orbiting the Earth? And it's like, you don't throw theology in this.
That's like you're thinking too much about things that you just don't understand. I guess that's,
Yeah, you're using theology to answer scientific questions.
Yeah.
And okay, this is where I differ with some creationists. They say, well, my science begins with the Bible. And I said, did you look at Acts chapter 17? When Paul was trying to relate to the pagans, he didn't start with scripture. He was relating to what they could see. And for science, for example, can you tell that a Christian had done, if you saw a chemical reaction and a report on it, and it was an accurate report, can you tell that it was a Christian or not?
No.
That wrote it.
No.
Right. It doesn't begin. Science is, observation, and it's observation, hypothesis forming, and testing. There are various ways to frame it, but they're basically things that we extrapolate from human experience. And it's an extrapolation. It's a little bit of, it's not direct, but you can extrapolate it. Yeah. So like when Faraday did experiments on magnetism, we're extrapolating it to the rest of the universe, and a lot of it held. So I would say that, when we call it creation science, we're looking for scientific evidence that supports our creationist view, but I don't actually start from the Bible as a premise. I look at it as kind of the goal of what we're trying to do. So I'm differing from other creation scientists.
Yeah. Give me an example of what someone who started with the Bible, give me an example of like a scientific discovery or something that would happen if they started with the Bible, like contrary to what you're saying.
There were some people that had intuitions.
Are you saying like basically people who, like I forgot what's his name, who
Michael Faraday
saw the paths of the seas and went and like discovered them? Is that like an example of what you're saying?
Well,
or are you more talking about just like confirmation bias when you're like?
Well, what I'm saying is some creationists define science. They begin as the Bible as their starting point, and I said I don't think that's science. So I'm not saying that you should decide one way or the other. I'm just sharing that is my definition of science, and I base that on John 10:38. Jesus said, "If you don't believe in me, believe the works." And I found that very interesting. That he's saying, okay, let's say you don't have the right worldview to start off with.
Yeah.
You could start off with the wrong worldview. But if you look at it in a certain way, it'll lead you in the right path. And I think that's really important, that Jesus is acknowledging that someone can start off with the wrong worldview. And even then, the evidence is strong enough that it'll lead him to the right path. So I think of Matt Bilyeu. He started off with the wrong worldview. And he looked at cellular physiology and he's like, oh, there has to be a God.
Yeah. And I think that I mean, deeper than all this, what we see as human beings, I think there's, an aspect to that is, you have to be unblinded to see like he did, and to be willing to accept a creator God. Because I think that, obviously you have these people who are, obviously I don't want to, assume bad intent, but, we'll look at something like, molecular biology or all these, this complexity, and we'll just not have an argument for it, but say there's no way there's a God. And it's just like, dude, you're being kind of clear right now that you're definitely not a neutral guy,
Oh yes, and the creationists sometimes have jumped the gun and said these are evil people. And I'm just like, well, in the sense that everyone has sinned, in that sense, yes, but a lot of them are genuinely just sweet. You would consider them very trustworthy, honorable people, but they just don't believe in a God.
Yeah.
And it's also on another level. A scientist, it's comforting to say you figured it out.
Yeah.
And so when you admit there could be a God you cannot comprehend, that's very unsettling, because we are comforted when we know. We're comforted when we know and understand something, but when you have to admit there's something you'll never know, that's kind of hard to deal with. Okay.
Yeah.
So they have the faith in science, but in any case, let me move on a little bit. That's just a little bit of a detour here, but I'm just saying God, it's like saying, okay, the pencil has to be bent because God wouldn't make it deceptive, or the sun has to orbit the earth because God wouldn't make it look like the sun rises and sets every day. These are terrible. Those aren't scientific arguments. They're theological arguments pretending to be science. Okay.
Yeah.
So if the earth is young, then there's no common descent. There's just the appearance of this hierarchy that looks like a phylogeny. So with, the way we do paternity tests in Ancestry.com, it seems natural to extrapolate it. I'm sorry?
You test the mistakes, right? Like
something like that.
DNA, yeah.
Okay, but now, and so this is, okay, so there's a human being here. This is the zinc finger 136, and the zinc finger 136 a human, the zinc finger 136 in pigs. I took the liberty to color code the cysteine amino acids, the cysteine residues, and the histidine.
Mm-hmm.
That is the signature of zinc finger protein, this CCHH pattern. And in the pig, there's one little deletion here.
Mm-hmm.
So you get this, but the computer can align it. You could tell that they're very, very similar. And
yes.
You're like, well, this looks like common ancestry to me, and I thoroughly agree.
So hold on, can I ask a question here?
Yes, go ahead.
So for example, I just looked up, and on science.org, I don't know how reliable this website is, but it says that we last shared a common ancestor with pigs about 80 million years ago. Okay, and this is my beef, is that if we actually did have a common ancestor 80 million years ago, why are these two protein sequences not more different than each other? If these creatures are evolving, adapting to their environments, and there's not a why do they appear to be like the best? They would be different if there was not if these creatures had not attained. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it looks like these designs are like perfected, and that's why they're similar.
Why don't you hold on to this, and I'll show you some more things.
Okay, because that's my beef, I guess. It's like I don't know if I'm being coherent. I guess it's just like
well, I'm sorry, I actually can't follow the argument that you have, but maybe if you can forbear with me.
Yeah,
but
no,
we're on the same page. If the Earth is young,
yeah,
this is by common design. Now, proving the Earth is young is kind of hard, and I feel that if I had to debate on this, I'd just say, okay, look, we could score a draw because I could just make it uncertain. It's not like abiogenesis yet. Okay, we want to get to the point it's as good as abiogenesis.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're against it. But they'll look at this and say, well, this is 50 to 60% sequence similarity. So depending on your score, so it has this definitive signature here, but you could see like the spelling here is different enough. See, like on this line it says MIT, and here it says ERT,
Yeah.
and MIK, and here it is ERI. So there are a variety of ways to do the scoring, and that would be kind of toward the end of your undergrad or beginning of graduate school to figure out all that.
Mhm.
So, but so they'll say, okay, this looks like common ancestry, and then so you'll take it from a variety of creatures, and you'll be able to make these phylogenetic trees, and say, hey, that looks like common ancestry. But the first, okay, and then we could kind of do the same with collagens. So that's the signature of collagen. So this is a human collagen here, and then this is the zebrafish collagen, and there's about 75% similarity between the two. You could see the signature depending on, again, your scoring technique. And you could build these phylogenetic trees and say, that looks like common ancestry. It's so obvious. But then the problem is exactly this, the protein orchard.
Yeah.
There's no effing common ancestor for all proteins. And the reason this is important is that I think only one class of organisms has collagen. Things with like bones, if you don't have collagen, you don't have bones. There could be some exceptions, but generally.
Yeah.
So you could think then, I think collagen is only in vertebrates.
Okay.
No, collagen is only in animals. Only in animals. I don't think plants have collagen. So you'll hear about these things called orphan genes, orphan proteins, taxonomically restricted genes. So even there's probably proteins that are unique to humans that we don't have with chimps. And even though we might even just say we're very, very similar, you would still need a miracle to create that new protein. So I'll argue like any creature that needs collagen, it's a miracle because collagen is very, very complex.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, they'll say, oh, look, it's just this repeated pattern. That's so easy. I'm just like, no, you study it more, it's going to be way more difficult. Evolutionists have a nasty habit of trivializing things and saying this is easy. They actually don't have any experimental evidence that it is. In fact, the more that we study it, we know that it's difficult. So, and then same for the zinc finger. So the first thing is there's no common ancestor here. You're going to have to, even if you assume universal common ancestry, you still need miracles along the way, right?
Yeah, correct.
So if you admit the miracle of abiogenesis and the miracle of, the genesis of new protein families, you're admitting miracles. You're already, halfway there as a creationist. They just may not be willing to do this for the entire organism. So now I just say, okay, it looks superficially like it's common descent, but like what happened with geocentrism, we had these anomalies. Like the Coriolis force, there's a Coriolis effect. Like when you flush your toilet in the northern hemisphere, it swirls one way, and in the southern hemisphere, it's going to swirl the other. There's a tendency there. It's a Coriolis force. There's also at the equator, the gravitational acceleration is lower at the equator versus the North Pole because it's a centrifugal force. So again, if you look at that protein orchard and then the prokaryote transition, one should start to have a big pause and say, no, it doesn't look like universal common ancestry. Or if you assume it, you'll need miracles along the way.
Yeah.
So then you're getting these anomalies. But then if the Earth is young, then it's a done deal. There's no common ancestry, universal common ancestry. It was common design. So why would the designer do this? I already gave the explanation that one of the reasons is for Model
medical.
Medical.
Yeah.
So there are some things that you'll hear in creationist literature, and I'm the only one that's talking about alternative ways that we solve the radiometric dating problem. This is one of them.
It's too bad that we don't have more, scientists working on this. Just think about how little compared to the entire world of scientists are creationists doing research on radiometric dating.
Right.
Which is,
I'll tell you what's one great thing is the secular world is doing God's work for us. Like that ENCODE project, we don't have $500 million, but it really embarrassed the evolutionists, the results of the ENCODE project.
Yeah.
And the follow-ons, because the evolution said if it's not junk, then evolution's wrong.
Yeah, and in my classes, we're told that junk DNA is not junk, but we're not taught. I know that makes you so happy, but it's the sort of thing where we're not told about the background of that. We're not told that means the evolution is wrong anyway. It just they will say, like, for example, there's a video recently that was like, even last year, it wasn't even in biology. It was I think it was forensics, and there's a video of a guy saying, and he was completely secular, and he was like, this is formerly thought of as junk DNA, but we now know that this has more, that this is regulating different things and acting basically like the doing stuff with the main genes that are coding for XYZ.
Okay, this is because I debated Dr. Dan 3 years ago, and it had some relation to junk DNA. And in that debate, he's saying this has to be junk. And the reason that came about is if it's too complex, then we would have too many mutations that are detrimental.
I remember you saying
it has to be wrong. If it's functional, then there's a mathematical thing. We can talk about genetic entropy. That genetic entropy didn't originate with creationists, by the way. It was by evolution. Nobel Prize winner Hermann Muller. So if you hear all this stuff about people trashing genetic entropy, it's like, well, they'd rather make the scapegoat a creationist, but it didn't originate with creationists.
And I remember you saying that you would get genetic entropy with even 1% functionality. Is that right, or am I wrong? I remember you saying that.
That's generally right.
I mean, that's kind of ridiculous.
It wasn't my math. It wasn't my math.
Because we've literally proved more than 1%. We've literally proved at least more than 1%. I mean, isn't that a done deal then? Scientifically.
Yes.
And see, that's my question. It's like these people aren't. Is it really scientific?
We'll talk about genetic entropy one time then, okay?
Yeah.
I'll teach it to you. It's a lot easier than you think. All right. Simply said, if you have a set of parents, mother and father, and all of their kids have at least one mutation that the parent didn't have, that means survival of the fittest is really survival among the fittest among the siblings, because that means the parents had the best genome.
Yeah.
Right?
Sounds biblical. It sounds biblical.
Well, and then the kids, it's survival of the fittest in that sense that the fittest among the kids might survive. There's a tendency there, but you're guaranteed that the actual best genome died with the parents.
Yes.
In general. So it turns out when you do all the math that 1% of the genome being mutated translates into one nucleotide change. So you do get, so 1% translates into one nucleotide. So you could just basically say, under the assumption of 100% functionality, or even 80%, but 100% makes the numbers easier, then you get 100 mutations in the children that the parents didn't have, guaranteed. And we know most mutations are detrimental. And they're biophysics. This is what's nice about biophysics. When you study biochemistry, you'll actually see why. Because it's a matter of geometry. It's just like a defect. Like with the car parts, everything has to fit nicely. You can't just randomly hammer and change the shape. So shape is really geometry's priority in making the parts actually work together. You can compromise the shape a little bit, just like you can compromise a tire. when you're driving, it starts to wear out. But there's going to be some point, it's not good when you drive it for the tire.
Yeah.
It's going to wear out. Okay, same principle for genetic entropy. So, where were we with that? So, I don't know how we got on the topic of genetic deterioration, but you might have asked me about that. So we'll just we'll just reset here. I was just saying if the world is young, then it's a done deal. It's by common design.
Mm-hmm.
And now we were talking about if creation. I know how we got there. We're talking about isn't it too bad the creationist scientists don't study this? I'll tell you what my feeling is. Do you remember the story of Gideon?
Yeah.
He had a large army, and God said, "No, this isn't. I'm not happy. There are too many of you. I want to whittle your numbers down." And then, he said he whittled it down to 300. So, being a creationist scientist, you're kind of like the 300, because God wants the glory. He's not going to say it's because of your skill or ability that the debate was won.
Wow, that's good.
God was there.
Yeah.
And so, this whole ENCODE thing, the evolution, it's so funny because there's this blog by a militant atheist named Larry Moran, and he was just fuming, we're teaching the next generation false things by saying that all that DNA isn't junk. It has to be junk. And he was on this tirade for years, and that was 11 years ago. And it's so funny now you're hearing it saying it's not junk.
Yeah.
But that came because of evolutionary theory. It didn't come from biochemistry or cellular physiology or anything. It came from the evolutionists. I'm like, guys, have you been able to make one decent contribution based on evolutionary theory? And I'd say no, absolutely not. I mean, it has to be to the exclusion. They'll say, well, you use evolutionary theory to say, this is similar to this and that, therefore we could do medical research. I said, you could do medical research just as well by saying God created those creatures so you don't have to sacrifice each other. There's keys to the puzzle. It just, they'll make up stuff. And so that was a big failure on them. So just going back to this whole thing about creationists, I think God is letting our numbers be small because he's going to be glorified in this process, just like for Gideon. But going back here, I go on.
I've never thought about that. That's good.
So there are, I think in a couple decades, we're starting to solve the radiometric dating problem. And that was part of why I showed those things about the catalysis of, heavy electron quasiparticles, et cetera. Cover that another time. So we do know that there's no common ancestor for all protein families.
I think we keenly know that.
So why do we have the similarity? I gave the answer. Here's part of the answer here. But the really cool answer, if we take a human collagen and a fish collagen, and we call these homologs. Have you heard the word homolog?
Yes.
That's great. You're learning a lot. See, this is why I wish I could take AP biology. I probably would not pass your test. I'd have to study hard. I can already tell you're learning an awful lot. So if you have these homologs and you put it through a computer program called DCA AlphaFold, and this is the computation.
Oh my gosh, that's agony.
All right. This is why you want to have a physicist or a computer scientist or mathematician on your research team.
Oh my goodness.
So a lot of research teams, you'll have the pure biologists, and then you'll have the computational guys, because no one guy can know it all. All right.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you're just going to have these teams, and the guy will specialize. So you have a specialist to do this. But the point is, when you put all these homologs together, you put it through this equation like that. This is like voodoo. It'll give you the shape of the protein, the XYZ coordinates.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
There's no reason evolution should evolve a self-decoding system. And I'm going to be doing an experiment, computational experiment, if we randomized like the difference, like you could see what has to be similar, like the red lines.
Yeah.
If I just randomize what's in between, it's almost guaranteed you're not going to be able to do fold prediction. That means this was conceived of from the beginning of time. And God, the designer, anticipated 21st century technology where we could start doing stuff like this through a human cannot do this in his head. You need a computer. But he anticipated our computational ability, and then we would be able to do fold prediction, shape predict. We use the word fold prediction, but it's, you could, the colloquial word is shape prediction. This will not arise by random mutation and natural selection.
Why so?
Well, if you had random mutation, you need to have. This is where it gets complex. It has a random pattern will not decode itself so naturally like that. And this is where this is in the field of electrical engineering, which is actually my background. But maybe I can kind of explain it. So when you compare the columns of like the things that are not what we call conserved, means that are identical across species.
Yeah.
Like this G here, the G amino acid, the G residue is glycine. So you could see that they're the same in all the creatures. But then in some creatures, like say the fish might have like a Q here, and the humans and primates will have an S here.
Yeah.
And it can detect if there's what they call covariation in the patterns. I'm trying to remember how this was done. Oh yeah. So like if you had like whenever an S was converted to a Q here, you'll see that in another position, like the M, like say the A would be in a fish and a K in a human. And this is where the computation gets really crazy. But when you've noticed all these, it's basically saying when you've changed this in one creature, it also has to change an amino acid in another position in the other creature.
Okay.
And when you pump this through, it's able to say, okay, that means that amino acid is close in position to this amino acid. And then you can start to determine the shapes of the protein when you run it through this algorithm. And this is very complex how it's done. But the point is, if it were random, you would not have that correlation and you would not be able to do shape prediction. I mean, you're getting up. This is like.
You mean by random, you mean random process or random mutation?
Random process.
Okay.
A random process. So, meaning, okay, so have you ever heard like what a modem tone sounds like? It sounds like, a hiss.
I know what a hiss sounds like, but I don't know what a.
Okay, so the old modems used to go over the telephone lines.
Oh wait, I think I know what you're talking about.
Okay, like if you heard a fax machine,
yes.
When it's dialing up, and then you hear this funny, it's called white noise sound, like a hiss.
Like the kind of, or no?
Well, let's see if I could. Okay. Let's see if I could get this, because there's like a fax modem. One moment. See if I could just play it. Let me see if I could. Okay, hang on. Now I can't get this thing. Okay, let me play it for you here. 1 second.
I could hear that.
Oh, you could hear it. Okay,
yeah.
So let me give you the sound here. Okay, that's what we call white noise.
Yeah.
Now it sounds random, but it is random in one sense, but then it's actually very well designed in another.
Okay.
So in electrical engineering, we have this thing called like autocorrelation and stuff, where you can actually take what sounds like noise and then reconstruct it to be a design.
Oh wow, that's cool.
So like if you're listening to like the transmission on the internet of us communicating and having the stream, it would sound like that if you converted it to an audio sound.
Huh.
So what this fax machine does is it sounds always like this. You know, if you can, because remember, this used to be transmitted on a telephone line.
Yeah.
And this is what it would sound like. Right? But it would go through these modems, modulator, demodulator, and it would reconstruct it. You could send a picture, a color picture, or at least a black and white. Now, isn't that amazing? And it turned out, extend that, you could send video files, you could send anything. And how is it that we're able to reconstruct it? Well, it's all that intricate math that I showed you. So something that is superficially random, you can establish that it's not. All right? And so the way biology is constructed, it's constructed in a way that you can self-decode it. The reason the modem works is you had the engineers say, okay, this is, if I send this, this is how you're going to recognize it as being, you know, like a particular pixel color or something. Part of, okay, it's very complex. You had the engineers figure it out, you know, the sender and receiver, how we're going to agree on a language, what we call a protocol. Biology is constructed that it will actually teach you what the protocol is and be able to reconstruct this. That is very powerful design. I've been invited to address the Discovery Institute conference in June about this. I hope they'll let me.
Yeah, that sounds really
it's way out there.
Yeah, it's way out there, but that would be crazy. I mean, that sounds extremely complex.
Okay, this is PhD level stuff. So I'm just giving you a taste from the very simple. See, but God puts design at levels that everyone can understand.
Yeah.
Because I talked to a mother. She recently had a baby. She said, yeah, I was sort of, you know, I had my doubts, but when baby was born, I looked at the complexity. So there's only God couldn't have made that.
Yeah.
And so even intuitively, sometimes people will just know only, you know, God had to be involved in making that. But then you can learn it formally when you get up to the PhD level, and
then it becomes really clear.
Oh yeah, just like when you hear James Tour talking about it. So this is a level of design that even most creationists don't understand.
Yeah, and the beauty of that though is that, you know, people all throughout history wouldn't have ever understood that. You know, just now, you know, God thought about now, which is kind of beautiful.
And we happen to be in a you know, we have a whole set of language that people, if I talked about fax machines to an ancient person, it's like, what's that? and so let me just do this for the benefit of the audience. This is just having a little fun here. All right. And how that relates to what we were talking about is, let me see. Slideshow. This relates to the math that you're seeing here. That helps decode. It's this sort of math that decodes that modem signal to reconstruct it. These are parts of the reconstruction filtering process.
Okay.
And then what we learned in building modems and modern digital communications, we then start applying that math to looking at amino acid sequences, and we're like, wow, it decoded itself. Isn't that
Wow.
cool?
Wow, that's actually really cool.
So,
yeah. And that sounds like smoking gun among.
I mean, I think that just kind of puts this out of the question, you know.
I
out
mean,
of the
yeah, and that's where it goes back to like, is that against evolution of complexity, or is that against common ancestry, or both in a sense?
It's not against common ancestry, but it does say that it can't. It's a level of complexity that is not feasible with a random walk.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason it should do this, but it does explain one thing very interestingly. Is let me go back a little bit. Yes. For this pattern to work, it will result in a nest. If you create a pattern that can do shape prediction, it will naturally generate a nested hierarchy.
Wow.
You cannot avoid the generation of a nested hierarchy. So what looked like a phylogenetic diagram of common descent, it can be alternatively explained as it was a common design feature. You will get a nested hierarchy. You have to have a nested. The nested hierarchy is a consequence of this design goal.
Okay.
It's if we wanted to make, let's say hypothetically you're a designer and you wanted to make a self-coding system that's spread across organisms, it will make a nested hierarchy. There's no way around it.
Wow. And see, like, to me, that sounds so much more empirical than saying, let's just make up, without empirical evidence of common ancestry.
Right.
But then it's the sort of thing where, are people going to accept this in the mainstream, that, just because, even though it sounds 100% more empirical, it's the question of, will they accept that?
Well, it's just like, I try to tell creationists, I said, do you know why people's hearts are hardened? And it's really kind of sobering.
Yeah.
It's like it said, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. It's like, that's kind of hard to hear, but yeah. God, we can't explain why God would, open some people's eyes and harden other people's hearts. That's a tough theological question, but just people, their eyes have been open. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Something in my opinion that it gets a little bit too much, to the point where you're playing God, or you're playing God's mind to answer a question like that. Yeah.
So I just tell people, just be grateful. It says in Hebrews, today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. So I just tell people, I said, if you feel God has worked in your life, you have a choice. If your eyes start to be open, you can decide to close them. God's not going to force you to keep your eyes open.
Yeah.
One of my favorite verses is Proverbs 25:2. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of
kings to search it out.
And also the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. And, a merchant, where a man bought the field, sold everything he had and bought the field. So that treasure is hidden from a lot of people. And so I tell people, I said, one reason it's not so obvious is it's by design. God hides things, and he hides treasures. And if you want it bad enough, you're going to look. You're going to spend all you have to find it. And that means it could be a tough search but if God is leading you, don't close your eyes, because there'll be consequences if you do. You're not going to end up in a good spot. But going back to this, just to close out, we can experimentally prove that this is not a random pattern. And this is some of the computational work I want to do over the next years. But I'm transitioning out of the biology stuff. And Emery was like, no, we like you in biology. Well, it's like, well, you don't have enough physicists. in the creationist world, and I'm going to be studying photonics, but I have about 5 years. And one of the last biology things I'm going to do is to show that that can't be a random pattern. You can't have random mutation. This has to be, it has to be, it is too delicate. And going back to your point about the decay over time, this
Yeah.
pattern, I mean, let's say hypothetically we started out where we are. We're able to do fold predictions
Yeah.
this way, shape predictions. If hypothetically all creatures were evolving for the next several million years, this pattern would be erased.
Well, yeah. What does that mean about the past?
Exactly. That's a testable prediction computationally. I think I could demonstrate. Let me just say this is all preliminary, but I think I could prove it. And I've had some conversations, like a creationist I know who's part of the secular world that does this.
Yeah.
She said, "Yeah, get this." So let me show you this diagram again here, and we had the fold prediction. Let me get to the fold prediction here. If you took, like, say, in a major group like the fish or the plants, the fold prediction will fail.
Why is that?
Because each creature has a piece of the puzzle. I said,
Oh, wow.
this would tell me God designed all these creatures with us in mind. So the theme that I keep saying is God made this pattern of similarity and diversity for our benefit so that we can understand our own biology. But it goes even, okay, so like I said, we figured out the genetic code by studying bacteria. We figured out the human genetic code by studying bacteria. That's incredible. But we now do full predictions. If we didn't have fish, if we didn't have plants in these homologous sets, the full prediction would fail. I asked that question when I was at the Dallas conference of a researcher in this.
When was that? When was that conference?
February 17th and 18th.
Oh, wow.
This
Okay,
year.
recently.
Did you see the video on my evidence reasons?
I think so.
Jonathan
I think
Guzman?
I watched a little bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah, he was there. And I asked a researcher when I was down at Dallas, I said, I want to do an experiment. Let's just remove a set of creatures. And the researcher said, I can tell you for sure it's going to fail because this is well known if you don't have all the creatures represented.
Well,
So it's like,
my goodness.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, that is awesome. Oh my gosh.
So this picture here is, this one means a lot to me. So let me explain a little bit. So if we want to study the genetic code and translation, a lot of molecular biology is done with bacteria.
Yeah.
If we want to understand eukaryotic architecture, particularly the stuff that ENCODE does, the what we call post-translational modifications, we study yeast to understand humans. And if we want to study introns, a professor of mine said, paradoxically, humans share many more introns with the plant Arabidopsis thaliana than with the fly or nematode. So
would evolutionists say that humans share a more recent common ancestor with a fly than a plant? Is that why?
No, actually, the reverse: a plant versus a worm.
But no, I mean, is it paradoxical because evolutionists think that?
Yes, it is paradoxical.
Okay, that's why. Okay,
that's exactly it. Now, if you want to study the nervous system, we study squids. I mean, nerve cells. If you want to study nerve cells, we study squids. Ideal. If we want to study, like the central nervous system and brains, we study things like worms. Now, obviously, when we want to do medical testing, we study mice. We do a lot of medical testing on mice, and the best candidate to do medical testing for procedures and pharmaceuticals is the chimpanzee, but they've outlawed that because they said it's inhumane. they'd rather do aborted. They'd rather do fetuses or whatever.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, doesn't it? Gosh, it's terrible.
I'm sorry to be cynical there.
Yeah, but still.
So I wanted to give you an over. I felt this is important to give you an overview of what can be done in creationist biology. But one point I wanted to say, it's hard. Every Christian that really loves the Lord will have kind of, it's hard to contain yourself and not want to share it.
Yeah.
So there are paths to take to be either kind of on the evangelistic side of being a creationist or the research side, where you do research, you may move the needle a little bit in science, but then you be a witness to people in your circle. So like if you think about Rob Stadler, he's not on the touring circuit going around giving talks about creation.
Yeah, he's not one of the members of the big three, correct?
Correct. And same for John Sanford. His
Yeah.
policy was his creationist research. He wanted to advance medical science, biotechnology, or any science period, and also contribute to creationism. He said the way he would hire people and budget, because he owned a patent to the gene gun, so he was able to finance this. Is it had to fit that criteria? Whereas I was in Randy Galuza's office for 2 hours when I was at the Dallas conference, and I visited the ICR. He said our policy is we want to reach as many people, as possible with the amount of effort that we invest in. And I was telling him I was transitioning from biology into physics. It's a really funny conversation because Jake Hebert, who's their physics guy, was there. Yeah. And I said, well, Dr. Galuza, I feel my calling is not to do that. I want to reach out to students. Well, like you're an example here, Samuel. And I said, physics students are people too.
Oh my gosh.
We all laughed. So I'm just saying, just because you don't reach a lot of people doesn't mean it's not God's calling.
Yeah. That's true.
You don't measure your success in the kingdom in terms of how many people got saved. I'm sorry to say this, but sometimes it's like people measure their value in God's kingdom by how many people that got saved through their ministry. And I'm like, that's terrible.
Yeah, that's not biblical.
It's not biblical. And so, the Lord lead you, whether you want to be a researcher or an evangelist or maybe somewhere in between. I think, it's, if you think the path of what Rob Stadler followed, that was a long, hard path, but he can speak authoritatively. And probably the best example is, of course, James Tour, just an outstanding scientist, and he has a platform. But the sad thing is his YouTube channel is only the fraction of the size of Dave Farina, Professor Dave.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I haven't been following that like a ton, but I followed it a little bit. It's just it's silly. I guess I don't know. I don't know why. I guess I do, but there's so much like YouTube drama and toxicity, like the creationists versus the evolutionists, I guess on some particular channels, which I won't name.
I will, but go ahead.
I guess I don't really get the point, because I guess we both know that they're not going to change their minds, and we won't change ours. I guess there's more, I guess, ethos or credibility for me when it's like real science or like real scientists doing real research in a real place, not just on some, it basically looks like a TV show. I don't like that. And like I watched like a lot of those kind of channels for a while, and it kind of got me, like, gave me a sick feeling in my stomach, like there was something wrong. And
well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
That's kind of the temperament that's important for someone to become a creationist researcher. And
Yeah.
I'll add, okay, so I know some people, like I said, they're creationists, but they're researchers. So the one thing is, at this point, you can do research that will advance both science and creationism, but it's often not going to be. One needs a great deal of providence, and there are only a few people that will be lucky enough to be in that position where, I mean, where they can make such a gigantic discovery that it's going to change creationism and science. And as I said, historically, some of the biggest developments for creationism happen in the secular world.
Yeah.
And I'm almost like, I'm almost glad for that, because you think about the Battle of Gideon, it was God that got the
Yeah.
glory, because it wasn't Gideon's military prowess. It was basically Gideon's enemies killing each other.
Yeah.
And
They were killing themselves by their own.
exactly. And you knew it was the hand of God. So
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, um, you know, that might help you ask the right questions about your career path, because, and also mold your expectations. It might be that, you may, there's an inherent need to want first to know for your own satisfaction that you were right.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what happened to me is I just had to wait on the Lord. And we live in this era where a lot of problems that we had for creationism in my lifetime got solved. So the junk DNA is a big example. They were hammering us on that so badly.
Yeah.
I remember even as recently as 11 years ago, it looked really bad. I said, I can't argue with Larry Moran and all these guys.
Mhm.
And then only in the last 3 years, it's just like the floodgates have opened. And now I'm pleased to hear even a high school teacher will say, no, that's not junk. That used to be the story. But I hope they don't, I hope someone will go around and at least collect what the evolutionists have said, because they look really stupid now. They really, like Francisco Ayala looks like a total idiot now, that he was
Yeah.
saying, what an incompetent designer. And it actually ends up being the centerpiece of what distinguishes humans, especially what they call these junk things that they call junk, where these ALU repeats. It's been flipped.
Yeah. It's the genetic computers thing I remember seeing from you.
Oh, thank you for watching. Did you see that one?
Yeah. What was it? The flip-ons, flip-off Ayala or something?
Oh
like
my
that?
goodness. Oh, so you watched that. And then I gave this article. Let's see. Creation. I did write for Creation Evolution
That was a
headlines.
hilarious title.
Let's see. Cordova memory. And I'm going to show it. I have to. This is.
There was something in there that interests me too. I remember from a long time ago. It was genetic redundancy in the genome. To me, that sounds incredibly. You can't have that in any other way by some sort of engineering or design mind perspective. That genetic redundancy kind of goes against, entirely contradicts a natural selection keeping the best.
Oh, okay. So this is the article that I wrote. Some junk DNA may act as a computer, and this was, I said, look, they say this can't be good design because it's all the same thing, and I said no.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I said, you guys are idiots. And Ayala was saying,
That's evolutionary logic for you right there.
yeah. And then then you heard my thing about the flip-ons. Yeah, it's gotten, when I wrote that was even before the flip-ons came. Now,
Yeah.
it's not going to stop. It's just hilarious. So I wish we would collect it, because you see the evolutionary rhetoric. They're saying, this has to be junk. And that didn't come from creationists. That was evolutionists that said, if, ENCODE is
Right.
if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong, and
Yeah.
ENCODE is right.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, you stick around long enough, and you will see, at the rate technology is moving. You stick around long enough, a question that you had might be answered in your lifetime.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and I've seen it. So how that relates to being a creationist in your career, it might be that your role is to just teach what's already out there. So what I've shared with you today was not, I said I'm researching in these areas, but someone else had actually done all the heavy lifting. I'm just kind of putting my little nuance and learning. So a lot of the research for you would be just learning what other people have already done, because
Yeah.
it's just kind of like in those battles where God fought for us.
Yeah.
Um, like the battle of Hezekiah, when the angel of the Lord came and wiped
Yeah.
out Hezekiah's enemies.
Yeah.
After that, they just went through the camp and they could just plunder. So God has already provided. So a lot of your research really is just finding what other people have already said,
Mhm.
because there would certainly be a place for someone with PhD credentials just to understand the literature and then convey it to the public.
Yeah. Wow.
So, hopefully I've given you stuff to think about and to consider.
Yeah, you
Um,
have definitely.
and I look forward. This is a recorded thing. I'm going to upload it and you can watch it. And if you have questions, sometime we can meet again, maybe in a
Yeah.
couple months or how about after you graduate?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Yeah. Get through your exams. Um, and may the Lord uh, guide you. Um, Now I can edit this video, but I'm going to invite you. Would you like to offer a prayer to God for both of us? I could use it. Um,
Yes, definitely.
okay. And then I'll close out. What I'm going to do is I'll close out with music. What music did you want? That same one that we opened with? Or how
Um,
about I stand in awe of you? I can play that.
can you do like a song of my choice?
Um, Actually, I only have two songs.
Okay.
The one that
D-
I stand in awe of you, or
um,
the one that we opened with.
let's do the one that the other one. I stand in awe of you because we opened with the other one.
Okay, so what we're going to do to close out the show is you'll say a prayer, and then I'll play that song. You'll have to turn off your mic when we play the song, and then
Okay.
I'll end the recording, and then we can talk privately backstage for a little bit. Would that
Awesome.
work?
Cool. That works
Okay,
with me.
all right. You can go ahead and close this in prayer. Glory and honor to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Heavenly Father, Lord Jesus, Holy Spirit, thank you so much for allowing us to have this conversation tonight. You are so wonderful, and we we will never fully comprehend that. And I just thank you so much for being able to be invited on the show. And I thank you so much for allowing me to talk with this wonderful man, Sal. And God, I pray that you would bless his mind, that you would guide his mind, that you would establish him firmly and more firmly in you, so that he comes up with the things that you want him to know about your creation and about how you can how we can spread that to others and how we can glorify you through what you have made. Thank you so much, God. And I pray that you would guide me and other students who are creationists as we go to glorify you in our careers. And I just pray that you would be sovereign over our careers and in everything we do. I pray that you would help us to honor you. Um, God, just thank you so much. And I pray that you would help us to have the mind of Christ when we look at science, and that we would be studious because of our great Lord and Savior. I ask this in your name, God. Amen.
Amen.
I stand in awe of you. You are beautiful beyond description, too marvelous for words, too wonderful for comprehension, like nothing ever seen or heard. Who can grasp your infinite wisdom? Who can